Orstera, like the worlds of every video game, is a world of destinies that are preordained, that already are mapped out for its participant ahead of time. Unlike other worlds, however, Orstera does not hide this intention from you. It is built up of numerous intersecting symmetries in which, no matter where you start, Atlas Dam, Rippletide, Cobblestone, Boulderfall, no matter who you are, no matter how and where you choose to go, although the content of your story is unique to the life your character is to lead, it follows a predictable track. You begin in a city, one of many equally spaced out cities. You are disrupted from your daily life by an interruption of some kind. Ahead of you is a singular pathway that leads you out of your town towards a starter dungeon, and the antagonist you defeat catalyzes your need to leave your place. It launches you into a journey that compels you to reach for something greater, for something else. You are separated always by two regions from the next person you hope to recruit. These regions, the East Atlas Dam Flats, the West Clearbook Traverse, are pure periphery, too insignificant to furnish anything except itself as a distance, as a necessary space that accentuates their destinations. They are too insignificant to warrant even their own names, and with a sparing few exceptions, even their own quests. Although nearly the entire world is already available to you from the start, the tracks you can beat extend out centrifugally from the starter locations, themselves placed around a central lake area, but your path is restricted naturally by high-level enemies you might find in these outer regions, until after you have gathered your companions and grown in strength. As your time in the world of Orstera unfolds, what is most idiosyncratic about it is that, sure, there are individual stories to be told by each of its 8 protagonists, but none of the characters in themselves tell stories that depend on the others, that overlap and intersect with each other. The intersections in their lives are absent, except in fleeting scenes of spontaneous travel banter, and until, perhaps, the stories that are told in the records of the apothecary Graham Crossford at the very end of a completionist's run of the game. Indeed, a coherent and complete playthrough of the game, that is, from the start all the way to its credits, can be told by completing only the 4 chapters assigned to any one of the characters without ever meeting any of the others. It is striking that the developers of the game seem to recognize this fact for themselves. They even included it as the lone traveler entry on its list of achievements and trophies. In other words, in a genre that has long distinguished itself according to the flights and trials, the growths and the struggles of its protagonists, the real movement, the underlying machine that gives rise to the world of the game, the machine that impels forward the unfolding of the first Octopath traveler, doesn't seem to rest on this mechanism of protagonism at all. Protagonism has long been the central motor function of these worlds. Final Fantasy VIII could not have been as it was without the specific incursions of Laguna, of Squall, and Rinoa in their resistance to the phenomenon of time compression. The world of Nier could not have been as it was without the tragic interventions of the player character and his sister. These protagonists are necessary to the fabrics of their very worlds, which cannot be interpreted and which cannot proceed without first framing the world's very movements within the personal decisions these protagonists have made in order to shift it and to shape it. No, when Octopath Traveler seeks to distinguish itself within its genre, it relies on something entirely different. The motor function of the world is not exercised by its characters. It depends not on any single one of them. The equation is reversed. The world does not depend on its characters. What is fundamental instead is the vital structure of Orstera itself. It is this world that everyone has in common. It is this world that bears the threads of continuity that draw all 8 characters together who are otherwise superfluous. It is this world that serves as the language through which their personalities intercommunicate, through which their stories begin and interlink, and which disperses them all across its face on their various errands and adventures, each parallel and in tandem with the other. It is not Alphen nor Hanit, not Primrose nor Therian, but the world itself that compels its participants to trace its structures, its shapes, its geographies, its plot beats, to compel the world to unfold and to realize itself as the world it has always been, and which it will continue to become for as long as its stories are told. This whole time, The fact of the world-forwardness of Octopath Traveler has been self-evident in its very name. Octo for 8 paths, 8 stories, 8 letters, one and each name for a different traveler. O for Ophelia, C for Cyrus, T for Tressa, O for Ulbrich, and so on, a cycle that neatly reproduces itself, perhaps even statically, under an entirely different skin in the second game, with different names and different stories in a different place, all of which are nevertheless part and parcel of the very same world. To put it to summary then, Octopath Traveler does not first and foremost call us to experience the lives of its characters, to experience their unique trials and their unique travails. It calls us to experience the world itself, the world that permits their stories to play out, and that marks out the contours that both demonstrate that they belong to and are derived from that world, while at the same time producing it by the very fact of their acting into and upon it, by the very fact of the telling of their stories. Orstera is a world that does not specifically require any one of them, but it could not unfold at all except through them. In this way, I believe that Orstera is like our own world, the real world, the world that we come from before we enter the world that is of the game. It calls us to ask a new question of ourselves: what does it mean to be of a world? Let us start with one way to answer this question, with thinking what a world is. As a starting point, let us say that a world is a place, one that is made up of a multitude of different places existing in continuity and interconnection with each other. In our world, the real world, the names of these places are palimpsests, settings comprised, in their entirety, of recognizable strata that contain the memory of everything that came before. In other words, a world is something that records the stories and the memory of all its places, and these recollections have a concrete material existence. They make the world what it is. For example, when we ask after the name of a location, contained within the answer, whether we know it or not, is the heritage of its entire history up to and including the point of our inquiry, of all the place's privileged values and priorities, of its significance in the collective consciousness of those who live and have lived within it across time and across its spaces. A place contains the markers of all the values and the histories to which it attends, as well as those that it has tended to exclude. This is why, for example, in Canada, there is a city named London after the London of England, built on a river named the Thames, after the English River Thames. That is why in this city's core, there are many streets named akin to places in the Old and Greater London like Oxford and Piccadilly Circus, of Blackfriars, and of Pall Mall, why there is a Covent Garden Market, and a St. Paul's Cathedral, or why there are streets named in honor and in memory of glorious imperial British military victories that were contemporaneous at time of settlement, say with the victory of Arthur Wellesley, the first Duke of Wellington, over the French Empire and Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo. What then does it mean to enter the world that gave rise to London, Ontario? Canadian historian W.L. Morton traces an old and deeply rooted hope held by the refugees who first settled what would come to be the Canadian province of Ontario, the hopes of the so-called United Empire Loyalists, who, even in being driven out of the newly independent United States of America, remained, quote, Americans, unreconstructed Americans, for whom, quote, in the bitterness of exile, their Americanism only intensified. The collapse of British Empire in North America, signaled by American independence, left what is now Canada as the residue of its spectacular failure, Morton writes, a failure that was an intolerable injury to the cause of these refugees, and that American independence was the result only of defect and disorder in the colonial administration that failed to manage the appetites and chaotic whims of its subjects. Lieutenant Governor John Graves Simcoe, who designated London for settlement, exclaimed it to be on his first visit to the Forks in what he would call the Thames in 1793, a place fit to be a, quote, metropolis of all Canada. He envisioned it to be the capital of the colony and strove then to, quote, have his infant colony far in the interior of the continent, namely Upper Canada, what is now Ontario, recreate, quote, the very image and transcript of British institutions and British liberty. A renewed nation to be centered on a city he had long intended to be the capital of a resurgent British civilization in North America, one perhaps fated to be reunited in rule over all its historical subjects on the continent. The London of today is not even the capital of the province of Ontario, much less of Canada. It sits a 70-minute drive from an international border that spans a continent that remains divided 200 years later. The old loyalist dreams rendered impossible by an ascendant United States that did not fail under British military pressure during the War of 1812. Rather than existing as Simcoe's image of a new Britain, sovereign over all America, rather than a city to rival the old London and the old Britain in all its splendor, it seems instead that a repetition in the vision of W.L. Morton has occurred. That, just as Upper Canada was a residue of the failure of British Empire in America, just as the existence of a French Canada under the British Crown was a residue of the failure of King Louis XIV's ambitions for New France beginning with the War of Spanish Succession, the city of London, then, is a city of residues, of palimpsests. If this place was bound to the visions of the protagonists of its centuries of history, it has failed each and every one of them. But it is not so, because it is not purely the sedimented outcomes of countlessly stalled protagonisms. It could never only have been this. Instead, the city of London, like every other place, has come to mean something else, something that exceeds the failures of the aggressive ambitions and limitless visions that any one of its shapers had ever intended. In other words, in our world as well, that is the real world, the world which we are from, what endures does not seem to be rooted in protagonism. What endures always seems to be the place itself, the places we encounter and which self-manifest in turn, these same places in which we participate by the mere fact of our presences within them, and which accordingly also make us what we are. A place is that which endures, it is that which is continuous, even as all or any of its specific outward facets shift and change, even as they are assimilated or extinguished, however incompletely, in the contingencies of its unfolding in history. A place is that which remains as it is, even as all its participants change, even as it is helpless to unfold, except through the irreversible actions of its shapers, who persist even if I fail to recognize them as such, who certainly are not exclusively human, and who I may not necessarily even recognize as alive, or even as a distinct objective formation. The participants in a place are those with whom I co-consist and co-constitute in relations of kinship, whether or not I even am aware of my inevitable embedding within these relations. A place is that which persists, even as it refuses stubbornly to be contained by any one of those shapers, by any and every one of us, no matter how desperately we try to force it within a mold that guarantees that the place becomes our place, that it might stay our place, and not anyone else's, for the rest of time. In fact, to actually achieve this goal, something that has never happened, would be the only way for me to ensure the guaranteeing of my own identity and to eject all possibility that the impulse of change eventually will overtake and destroy me and everything I love. But this discussion is one for another day, another time. Let us wrap up this primer to place and to the world. In other words, what today I might call the city of London is that which has come to possess itself, to be the guarantor of, and I say this in quotes, its own identity, its own self-expression in evolution, a self-expression that exceeds the totality of conceptualization by the efforts of any one limited human imagination. Constrained as that imagination is by the finite cadre of experiences one collects, as they are scattered across a finite collection of places, of times, and of spaces, we, as the mere shapers of a place, as mere transiently finite participants, are unable to lay claim unilaterally to this self-expression. That is, we are only able to relate to it in one way, insofar as we possess a stake in its process of becoming, a stake that we have by virtue of our participation in its creation. We, too, are participants in an act of creation in evolution that instantly regenerates our own identities in turn, and yet all the while, we are forced to depend on each other. I might say we are even unable to grasp the meaning of a place as such, even as the entire weight of our identities in the moment rest upon our existence in relation with and through it. Even if we take the notion of palimpsest at its most superficial and concrete, such as in a place's heritage of its names, in its symbolic commitments to its genealogies, everything we are, by being of a place, seems to point to something that originates from outside of ourselves. This, then, is the power of a name, the name of a place that is a city I have come to know as London, a place in its own right with its own density and gravity, but which nevertheless finds a central way to bill itself only as a place that exists between two places it is not. This, then, is the name of a place that I have come to call London. A compressed object that twists time and space into the place in which its participants commune, and which then presents itself contemporaneously in the immediate moment of my experience as an endless confluence of palimpsests, of the projects of its participants, always already paltry, each and every one of them frustrated intolerably, and yet only ever partially in the end. This dense object bears a meaning that depends in totality on this frustration, that is always pointing beyond what anyone tries to say that it is. This, then, is the world that is made up of my places which I share with many others, and who thereby redefine me in turn, no matter how much this process stands to betray the me I wish that I am, that I wish I always will be. This is the world that I build by the fact even of my passive participation in it, by the breaths I take, by the footprints I leave with every stride I take. This, then, is the world, which is made up of places which endlessly renew themselves towards unpredictable futures as they co-generate alongside ones like me, who participate in them and are generated in turn. This, then, is the world, which appears to remain in continuity with everything it has always been, even as every one of its participants are ephemeral, are superfluous to its being in the world. This world will remain the world, even after myself and all my co-participants have vanished from its face. The time horizon of the places of the world extends far beyond the horizons that we, as its participants, can begin even to conceive in our tiny imaginations. This fact is why what is most real is the way in which the world we live in endures, even in spite of our attempts to control it, to possess and to exploit it, even in spite of our attempts to comprehend the full index of its possible meanings. This is the reason why I cannot declare myself to live within a world without declaring, in affirmation and acknowledgment, every place I have been from, every person and encounter and experience that has made me who I am, and those with whom I coexist. I am of my places. That is everything I am. Given this philosophical exploration into the meaning of a place, there is one last introductory aspect to consider, and for this we must return to the world of Octopath Traveler, the world of the game. I must develop what I for now will call the world-tether, an ineffable thread that traces my continuities between and beyond any one of the worlds I traverse, as well as any of its places into which I've become a participant, including those of the real world, the world from which I come, and which to this point I had always been. It is this world-tether that guides my attention as I traverse these worlds, and which acts as a fastener for my identity, permitting me to endure as I exercise this passage. It is this world-tether that provides a link that causes me to be incompatible, however partially, with the places into which I enter, because even as I am only paltry to them, neither am I entirely original to any one of them. It is this tether that causes me, involuntarily, to change also a place into which I participate. To begin with, the names of places in the first Octopath Traveler appear to fall generally into three categories. The first, they can be tautological. Their names are coterminous with their defining geographical features, or, more interestingly, the role of the place within the plot of the story to be told, as if the only purpose it serves is for the adventurer to encounter and reshape it. On the first count, Sunshade is a city that sits endlessly in shade from the sun. Grandport is a port that is large when taken into comparison to Tress's hometown of Rippletide. Riverford is a city on a river that one once likely had to ford before the bridge was built to it on the road from Orswell, and Quarry Crest is a city with a quarry on the crest of a mountain range. Others are named to purpose, but they don't escape this referential tendency either. Saintsbridge is a city with a bridge where members of the Order of the Sacred Flame live, and who hail also from the town of Flamesgrace, a gracefully snowy town that is where the sacred flame burns. Other cities yet are named to produce and invoke the vibe of a particular cultural milieu, one grounded in a fantastical representation of a different place as it is seen through the eyes of a newcomer or a visitor. There is little pretense that these references are meant to evoke fantastical pictures of places within our real world. and not the world of Orstera. Thus, unlike in the case of the Canadian city of London, the indicators of what frames its meaning and significance to us as the people who are visiting this virtual place does not manifest in a profound density that is heavy with the weight of its history and its stories. There is no city in Octopath Traveler that bears the inheritance of the place that I call London, a city born from the jilted hopes of imperial British resurgence, and which inscribes therein an ancient promise and legend for a new British America, centered on a city fit to the purpose of an imperial capital after the name it inherits, the London across the ocean. In contrast, in Octopath Traveler, it appears that most of the places in Orstera are named because they need to be named, because the stories of the world need to be told in given locations in order for them to be told at all. But isn't that true for us in the so-called real world as well? If I get into an accident on my commute back home, and it is a place between intersections and well-defined landmarks, I will furnish a label for that place that is also fit to purpose. This is the place where I got into that accident. This new place becomes an indelible part of my life story, and at the moment its story begins to remain to be told, the place emerges fully formed from my participation in it, initiating it into its being in the world, and little else. There may be physical marks, left perhaps in a short section of destroyed fence that had to be reinstalled, in fragments of glass that were missed when the area was cleaned and restored by the city. Perhaps the palimpsests of my calamity will be a walking hazard that may impinge upon or reflect in the life of another participant in this place down the line. What this shows is twofold. Firstly, that the stories told in and through the places where they happen are not only histories we refer back to, they are malleable, they are not categorical. And secondly, that in their existences, its place announces itself to its new entrants on account of imposing an immediate demand on their attentions. This announcement sets the stage for the possible field of stories that they are destined to bear well beyond the present moment, for the terms of participation and cogeneration of participants in place. Yet even as the weight of the forcing factor of change is introduced on behalf of the place, which demands my attention as a participant, neither is the participant entirely without a kind of inertia in their response to this forcing. This is because I, as participant, am tethered to something beyond the place. I am partly alien to the world into which I now enter. This alienness, my tether to a previous world beyond this world, is the basis for my differentiation within the place into which I now participate. I demand the attention of the place, in turn, and irremediably I impinge upon the stability of its identity. In other words, because we are tethered, when we enter a location and we interact with what is in it, as things happen to us and we do things to it, or to other people within it, we irrevocably change ourselves and the others who are involved, who are participants in the place into which we have become interjected. They are not the same, their place is not the same, however subtly, as they were before they entered into our involuntary interaction. In an instant, and with every intervening interaction I have, so too do their identities begin to slip and to dissolve, to become dependent on the me that I also am becoming. This, then, is what finally establishes the significance of even the seemingly arbitrary naming of the cities and the regions of Orstera. It highlights the role of the world-tether in a place. Its capital H history, if it can be said to have such a thing, matters less than the meetings, the encounters, and the conflicts that our protagonists will have, the struggles that they will face, the ways that they will change, but at the same time, they are forced to play out their stories in locations, in places. They are forced to transform and to be transformed within a world. Yet because these places exist, they do necessarily have histories independent of their protagonists, and the stories that play out cannot be divorced from those framing contexts. This is even true in Orstera and is again demonstrated for places whose names and senses break the world's immersive coherence by tethering their connotations directly to our real outside world, as it was with the tying of Atlasdam to congealed impressions from medieval northern Europe. But these tethers impose perilous restrictions of their own kind in turn.
although the range of my experiences will always be partly alien to my co-participants in the places that we share, a situation that holds just as truly for each of them, and which both creates possibilities in our trajectories of shared becoming, just as it jeopardizes our abilities to hold on to our past identities, our familiar tracks of truth and shared meaning, in our shared visions of the world. There are two inevitable outcomes. The first is an alienation that assumes the form of a mutually imposed violence. That the fact of my being in a place, but comprised of experiences concatenated through many different places of different worlds, also permanently and fundamentally secludes me from my neighbor, however partially, as a fact of my differentiation from them. Secondly, if I, as a participant, am a concatenation of my places, my entry in participation into a new place is merely the next imposition of its restrictions upon the conditions of my participation. In this way, although I am tethered to lineages of memory, even to a material existence that might exceed that world, I still live in the world of the Canadian city of London, which seeks to preordain my existence to play out on rails and on tracks that compel me to follow its set patterns, say, to live a life as a career holder, or else to work for my pay, to pay for my bills and for my taxes, or else to spend my life with friends in restaurants or bars and not in quiet neighborhoods after midnight, or else. It is a fact of my life qua participation in a place that I might live in a city of streets built to cater to the solitary commuter in a car, that I might sit in a lecture hall at a university that is shaped like an auditorium, as if the process of learning and thinking itself must begin by passively absorbing the certified expertise of a single all-knowing expert behind a lectern. Such is the progression of my life in a place, which also is an assignment of my place within such a world. So many lives that play out in Canada, distinct and unique as they are, track the same structures, the same shapes, the same geographies, the same plot beats. So too, as we live, as the stories of our lives fall into rhyme, so too do we compel the world that I have come to call London to unfold and to realize itself as if our world was of a London, of a Canada, that always was, that always will be, as if the world in which I live is to endure as itself in its eternity.